Today we're continuing to read The Brothers Karamazov, Book 6, The Russian Monk, Chapter 1, Father Zosima and His Visitors. When, with an anxious and aching heart, Alyosha went into his elder's cell, he stood still, almost astonished. Instead of a sick man at his last gasp, perhaps unconscious, as he had feared to find him, he saw him sitting up in his chair, and, though weak and exhausted, his face was bright and cheerful. He was surrounded by visitors and engaged in a quiet and joyful conversation. But he had only got up from his bed a quarter of an hour before Alyosha's arrival. His visitors had gathered together in his cell earlier, waiting for him to wake, having received a most confident assurance from Father Pacey that the teacher would get up, and as he had himself promised in the morning, converse once more with those dear to his heart. This promise, and indeed every word of the dying elder, Father Pacey put implicit trust in. If he had seen him unconscious, if he had seen him breathe his last, and yet had his promise that he would rise up and say goodbye to him, he would not have believed perhaps even in death, but would still have expected the dead man to recover and fulfill his promise. In the morning, as he lay down to sleep, Father Zosima had told him positively, "I shall not die without the delight of another conversation with you, beloved of my heart. I shall look once more on your dear face and pour out my heart to you once again." The monks who had gathered for this probably last conversation with Father Zosima had all been his devoted friends for many years. There were 4 of them: Father Iosif and Father Pacey, Father Mihail, the warden of the hermitage, a man not very old and far from being learned. He was of humble origin, of strong will and steadfast faith, of austere appearance, but of deep tenderness, though he obviously concealed it, as though he were almost ashamed of it. The 4th, Father Anfim, was a very old and humble little monk of the poorest peasant class. He was almost illiterate and very quiet, scarcely speaking to anyone. He was the humblest of the humble, and looked as though he had been frightened by something great and awful beyond the scope of his intelligence. Father Zosima had a great affection for this timorous man, and always treated him with marked respect, though perhaps there was no one he had known to whom he had said less, in spite of the fact that he had spent years wandering about Holy Russia with him. That was very long ago, 40 years before, when Father Zosima first began his life as a monk in a poor and little monastery at Kostroma, and when, shortly after, he had accompanied Father Anfim on his pilgrimage to collect alms for their poor monastery. The whole party were in the bedroom, which, as we mentioned before, was very small, so that there was scarcely room for the 4 of them, in addition to Porphyry, the novice, who stood to sit round Father Zosima on chairs brought from the sitting room. It was already beginning to get dark. The room was lighted up by the lamps and the candles before the icons. Seeing Alyosha standing embarrassed in the doorway, Father Zosima smiled at him joyfully and held out his hand. "Welcome, my quiet one. Welcome, my dear. Here you are too. I knew you would come." Alyosha went up to him, bowed down before him to the ground, and wept. Something surged up from his heart. His soul was quivering. He wanted to sob. "Come, don't weep over me yet," Father Zosima smiled, laying his right hand on his head. "You see I am sitting up talking. Maybe I shall live another 20 years yet, as that dear good woman from Vyshegorye, with her little Lizaveta in her arms, wished me yesterday. God bless the mother and the little girl Lizaveta." He crossed himself. "Porphyry, did you take her offering where I told you?" He meant the 60 kopecks brought him the day before by the good-humored woman to be given to someone poorer than me. Such offerings, always of money gained by personal toil, are made by way of penance voluntarily undertaken. The elder had sent Porphyry the evening before to a widow whose house had been burned down lately, and who after the fire had gone with her children, begging alms. Porphyry hastened to reply that he had given the money, as he had been instructed, from an unknown benefactress. And that's the end of the reading for today. Have a good day.